Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to create sci-fi structures for your projects, especially for cityscape scenes or something like that. Don't forget to subscribe and let's get started. Alright, we have several methods. Let me show you the first one. Redelete the default cube and add a plane. Now you can scale it up. I set the scale to 5. Then I go into edit mode and subdivide it a few times. Back in object mode, I go to the modifiers tab and add the subdivision surface modifier. I change the subdivision type to simple. Now I added displace modifier. And click new, then click on this small icon here and change the texture type to clouds. So now we have something that looks like a mountainous shape. But if I change the noise basis from Blender original to cell noise, our object now has a sci-fi look. We can adjust everything here. I change the texture size, switch the type to soft or hard, and here I change the grayscale to color. Now I go back to the modifiers tab and increase the subdivision number. Then I go back to the texture properties. I open the color drop down here, and if I enable color ramp and then just this color stops, you can see that my mesh starts to look like sci-fi buildings. And if you want to repeat this mesh, you can use the array modifier. Just make sure the array modifier is above all other modifiers. So that was the first method. Now let's move on to the second one. Now I delete all the modifiers we added and now we only have our plane. I add a subdivision surface modifier, then a displace modifier, and I add one of the textures generated with JS placement. JS placement is a free software that generates textures for you very quickly. I increase the subdivision level to 4. We can also repeat this texture on mesh. I go back to the texture properties, open the mapping dropdown, and here we can repeat this texture along the X and Y axis. I also need to set the mid level to 0, and this was the second method. But the third method is to use these same textures on a base mesh. For example, I add a cube, move it and scale it up. I go into edit mode, let the top face extrude it upward and move it along the y-axis. I press A to select all faces, right click and subdivide. I open the subdivision drop down and set the number of cuts to 10. Back in object mode, I first select the cube, then the plane. Now I press Ctrl L and click copy modifiers. Now the modifiers we used on the plane are applied to the cube as well. You can see that this looks weird on our cube. This is because we are not using a UV map. So here in the modifiers tab, I change the coordinates from local to UV. Then I go back to edit mode, press U and click cube projection. Back in object mode, I reduce the strength from 1 to 0.1. I go back to the texture properties and reduce the repeat to 1. And in the modifiers tab, I change the subdivision type to simple. You can also use a bevel modifier. I won't do that here, but if you do, make sure your bevel modifier is applied before the subdivision modifier. We can also use different textures for these structures. If you get close to these structures, you will notice we don't have enough geometry and we need to increase the subdivision. Now let's create a material for this object. Go to the material preview, select your object, go to the shader editor and add a new material. Set metallic to 1, set roughness to 0.4, decrease the value and add a Voronoi texture. Press Ctrl T, change the distance metric to Chebyshev, add a color ramp, connect the object coordinate to the vector, adjust the Voronoi texture scale and play with the color stubs. I add a few color stubs and adjust them. Now add a bump node, connect the normal to the normal input, and the color ramp should be connected to the height input, not the normal. Set distance to 1 and reduce the strength. Now we have a lot of fake details on our structure. Now let's add some small lights on the object to add a sense of scale. I duplicate my Voronoi texture, press Ctrl T, add a color ramp, connect distance to factor and adjust the scale and adjust the color subs. I duplicate the Voronoi texture again, play with these options here, and an emission shader. Connect the color ramp to the emission strength. I then add shader node and connect both the emission and principal PSCF to it. To control the emission strength, I add a mask node between the emission and color ramp and set it to multiply. And if you want to change the light color, you can just change the emission color. That was the procedural method, but you can also use the dot grids from JS placement. I did all these nodes and add an image texture. I open my dot grid image, connect the color to the value, connect the add shader to the surface, and we are done. Now let's take a look at my main project that you saw in the thumbnail. This is a procedural I created. It makes the scene look unsettling. You can think of it as a symbol of surveillance and control. These are the sci-fi structures, and you can see the project from different camera angles. If you want this project, the link to my personal website is in the description. You can place your order on my website, and after payment, you will receive the project file by email. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.